All right, we'll get started. Hey, Terry,
Oh, hey, Bryan.
you're an iOS developer, right?
Yeah, what do you ask?
Well, I have an idea for an app that might be great for conferences. It would be a way to connect with people and give them a business card, like a snapshot of your business profile with contact points.
Okay, have you thought about how you're going to build it?
Well, I've heard developers say that Nostr is pretty easy to work with and good for social apps.
Okay, awesome. Nostr is a great protocol, and it seems like it might be a good fit for your idea.
Okay, great. Well, would you want to work on it with me?
Sure.
Awesome, thanks. So, what's the first thing we need to do to get started?
Well, you're going to have to write a bunch of code to be able to have your app talk to the Nostr servers, which are called Nostr relays.
So that's before we can even work on what my app is about?
Yeah, unfortunately.
That sucks. How long do you think that'll take?
I don't know. It depends. Maybe a few months.
Months? My simple app idea, I thought it would be a weekend project. Now I'm not sure about it. Thanks anyway. Okay, so today we're going to talk to you about building apps swiftly with Nostr SDK. I'm Bryan Montz, and this is my colleague and friend Terry Yu. We are open source Nostr developers and Damus contributors. We created Nostr SDK for Apple platforms, and last year, also with Joel Clabo, and last year we were funded by OpenSats on the project.
Great. So just a show of hands, who is already currently using Nostr? All right, almost 100%. That's great. Well, in any case, what is Nostr? Nostr, it stands for Notes and Other Stuff Transmitted by Relays. And so that's a mouthful. What does it really mean? It's basically just an open source, decentralized protocol for publishing data on the internet. And one of the use cases for Nostr is to build social apps, like microblogging apps, for example. But that's not the only use case. You can use it to build like music apps or event apps or conference apps. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you could build with Nostr. And you all are probably familiar with centralized platforms like Facebook or Instagram or X, formerly known as Twitter. And the main differentiator here is that you can be censored on those centralized platforms. There's a single entity that owns that platform. And if there's something that you post on there that they don't agree with, they could take it down.
That's right. Now let's talk a little bit about background information on how Nostr can fight censorship. So here in the middle, you see 3 relays. They are independent from each other. And you see 2 users who are using 2 different clients, and they talk to different sets of relays. Well, what happens if one of those relays decides they don't like one of the users, what they're saying, and that connection is severed? Well, those 2 users, those 2 clients can still talk to each other because they have that relay in common. We believe that freedom of expression is a human right, and further that Nostr can help extend and protect that right around the world. Has anyone in here ever been censored on the internet? What about, have you ever self-censored for fear of censorship? I work on an app with millions of users, and we recently had to pull that app from a large country, because we wouldn't comply with their policies. Let's take a look at freedom of expression index around the world. You can see the darker color is where there are more protections for freedom of expression, and the lighter color is where there's more censorship, less protection. And you can see that those lighter areas, that's billions of people represented there.
So there was a recent event that happened, I think as recent as of last week, and X tweeted about it. Basically, the Brazilian government forced X to block certain accounts that are based out of Brazil, and it was completely politically motivated. But this is a concrete example of where a centralized entity, a centralized platform, is able to censor you. And so that's a really huge problem. Just a show of hands, who is using an iPhone device or maybe an Apple device? Yeah, a lot of people. You can see this map. It varies quite a bit. Maybe in the West, we have more iPhone market share, and on the East side, a little bit less, but still, like, it's pretty substantial. In particular, there's countries where maybe the usage is 10%, but 10% is still quite substantial if you consider the entire population.
And given that worldwide market share and all of the different types of devices that Apple produces, phones, watches, computers, TVs, and most recently Vision Pro, that adds up to around 2.2 billion devices around the world.
So we'd like to present to you what we've been working on for the last year or so. It's Nostr SDK for Apple platforms. SDK stands for Software Development Kit, which is another word for a Nostr library.
So what this is classes and functions for reading and writing notes and other stuff on Nostr. We built it in a way that follows Apple's coding patterns to make adoption easy and natural for developers. And we've included clear documentation and robust test coverage. Here's what the documentation looks like. It looks just like Apple's built-in documentation. It's very thorough. It has links to the Nostr spec that all the classes and types are based on. And the test coverage gives us peace of mind that our code is doing what we expect it to do.
So we've built Nostr SDK. We built this library completely open source. So it's open source using the MIT license. And what that really means is that anybody can come in and use the code that we've written to help them build their Nostr apps on iOS, on any Apple platform. And we hope that this library is able to elevate apps and expand the Nostr ecosystem. These are some of the more popular iOS Nostr clients out there. There's Damus, there's Nostsocial, there's Primal, there's Nostr with a U, and there's a lot more that I'm not covering here. But has anyone used one or some of these clients before? Okay, quite a bit. So what you may or may not know is that each of these clients implements their integration with Nostr slightly differently. And so they all follow the Nostr spec, but they might implement it slightly differently in a way that maybe slightly breaks the interoperability between clients, even though they're based off of the same data. And so that's a real problem, right? Like, we want as much interoperability as possible. And so we're hoping that with the Nostr SDK library that we're able to reconcile those differences between implementations so that everyone can share the same implementation, and be able to contribute to this library, and everyone gets stuff for free. And so we've published our Nostr SDK library onto GitHub, so anybody can come and read the code, use the code for their projects, and contribute back to the project. And the main takeaway here is that it gives developers a huge head start for building a Nostr app. We want it to be as simple as possible so you can just hit the ground running straight away, be able to build an app on iOS or any Apple platform. So we're going to get into a little bit more technical. If you're not a developer, don't worry. You can just kind of glaze over the details, but I think it's really essential for you to really understand what the building blocks are and maybe get a perspective for you to see what a developer might go through to be able to build an app using our library. And we think that's really straightforward. At the very core of it, Nostr is based off of public key cryptography. So you have a cryptographic identity. And so how do you operate with that? Using the library, you can just generate a key pair. So that gives you a public key and a private key. Or if you don't need to generate one because you already have one existing, you can load in an existing private key into this key pair class and you'll be able to operate that throughout the entire existence of this library. There was a few slides back, Bryan talked about relays, and you can have multiple relays. So if you want to operate on those multiple relays, we have this concept called relay pools. So in this example, we've seeded this relay pool with 3 different relays from Damus, Primal, Snort. It can be really anything. So the most basic programming example is a hello world program, which is just basically spitting out hello world. So in this example, you can load in your key pair using your private key. You can create a text note, which you sign with your private key that says hello world, and then publish it to your relay pool. Like super simple, a few lines of code. So the previous slide was about like writing events. Now we're talking about reading events, fetching notes. Again, really simply, you can filter on kind 1. And so kind 1 is just a special number that says, I want to fetch text notes. And I want to subscribe to those text notes on my relay pool. So out of my 3 relays, I want to say, give me my kind 1 text notes. And what it gives back to me is my subscription ID, which is an identifier to say like, oh, this is my subscription with this filter. And you can read Nostr events from that subscription.
Okay, so let's build a Nostr app. Here's what we're going to build. It's a simple app with a couple different views, one for posting new notes on the left there, and one for listening or following another user to see their notes. So we're going to start in Xcode. Xcode is Apple's tool for building apps. And we're going to hit File, New Project. And when we run that, you're going to see just the stock app that they give you, the template they give you. It just says Hello World there in the middle. Next thing we're going to do is add a package dependency, and you can see our GitHub URL posted in the search box up there. And then Xcode will recognize that, look up our library, and download it and link it into your app. First thing we'll need is a user type, and this is just going to hold a name and a key pair. We're going to use this to simulate logging in and following another user. With the user type in place, we'll add this one down here in the bottom called users. It's just going to hold a couple of users. That's going to be configuration for our whole app. And then we're going to create Alice and Bob. You've seen them before today. 2 users that we'll use in the app. Now we'll make a change to the root view of our app. This is Swift UI if you've never seen it before. That tab view there, we're going to say the root of the app is a tab view. And for now, it's just going to have one item in there. It'll be a profile icon with the signed in user's name. When we run that, we see the tab bar layout and the icon and the name there at the bottom. But that's a little boring. Let's do something more interesting. There's that relay pool that Terry talked about a second ago. You might see some familiar relays in there. Now we'll create a new view for posting. We'll bring in that user's information that we configured a minute ago. We'll need a text field. You can see that there kind of in the middle of the screen. And then below that, a post button. So the user can type in that text field, and then when they're ready, they'll hit the post button. Then we'll fill out the post function. You can see at the top there, it says event creating. That is part of the Nostr SDK. And so we provide handy functions for creating different event types on Nostr. So we'll create a text note with the content that the user has typed in. And then we'll just hand it off to the relay pool for publishing. Now, when we run that, we see we have 2 tabs at the bottom there. One of them says posting. On the right, it says posting. And there's our text view and our post button. This would actually already work, but we won't really be able to tell that it's working until we add the following view. So let's do that now. This is our following view. It's going to have the other user's name at the top, so Alice's notes or Bob's notes. We're going to bring in the same relay pool and users that we've been using. And we'll add this view to our tab view. So it'll be the third tab. When we run that, we can see the new view that says following. It's selected on the right there, but there's nothing on it. So we'll add a property to that following view called events. We'll use that to hang on to events that the relay pool gives us. And then we'll turn that into a list of all the content of those notes. And then last, when the following view appears, we need to create a filter, and we'll get the text notes only from that other user that we care about, and we'll subscribe to the relay pool with that. And then we'll just listen to the relay pool's events and add them to this view's events so that it'll be shown on screen. Okay. Just switch everything. Yeah, that's not going to work. Sorry, just give me 1 second. We had to change how this was working. Sorry about that. It's the change. I'm sorry, give me a second. No. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so on the left here we have Alice's phone. It's signed in as Alice. She is going to follow Bob, so she wants to see Bob's notes here. On the same way, Bob's phone on the right here, signed in as Bob, and he's going to follow Alice's notes. So Alice can type a note here. And can hit this post button. Where'd he go? Okay, great. Didn't work. Anyway, here's the final product.
We tested this beforehand.
Sorry. Anyway, here's what it's supposed to do. Just in those few minutes, we're able to make an app where two users on two different devices can post messages and instantly see them on the other device using Nostr. Well, it's not really peer-to-peer, but because it is using Nostr relays, but it's actually using Nostr relays to transmit that information. Yes. Yeah, they're not direct messages in this case, although the SDK does support that as well. So we've just shown what can be done with the Nostr SDK. Your app idea on Nostr can now be built with much less investment of time and money.
Sorry, 1 second. We're going to change the display settings. Okay, so that was pretty technical, but for the developers out there, like that's how you write the code. If you're not a developer, maybe that gives you an insight into what a developer might go through to be able to build an app. So as part of the Nostr SDK, we also bundle together a demo application. So just to show a subset of the different types of things they can do with the library. And so this is a video of just demonstrating how you can manage a relay pool. You can query a relay with, for a given public key, that's maybe the feed of text notes or people's follow list, or maybe the reactions that they've recently reacted to. You can create direct messages with the SDK, so you can type in the public key of the recipients, the private key of the sender, which is me, and say, oh, hello world, and you can send that out. You can generate a new key pair, so you can get your private key or public key, and you can query for Nostr addresses. So given an email looking like address, I can get the public key from that. I can get the set of relays. I can also validate if a public key is actually a valid public key. So it's only a very small subset of what can actually do. There's so much more that can do, but this is just a demonstration.
And that's built into the SDK so that developers can follow along, see how to do it. So what's next for Nostr SDK? Well, we really want feedback from client developers who use it. We want to make sure that it's easy and natural. We want to continue adoption of the Nostr spec, which is always changing and growing. And we want you to build your app with Nostr SDK. We also want community contributions. So here's a link to the SDK, and we welcome your contributions. Help us build Nostr SDK. And any questions?
So right now we don't have anything for key management. We definitely want to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to manage keys. I think there's some ideas floating out there in the Nostr development community, building like Nostr signing apps, for example, where you just delegate that responsibility to a different app on your device, but it hasn't really been explored too deeply yet.
There's also there's some things that we didn't necessarily want to put in the SDK, like we didn't put long-term caching of notes or something like that, because you might want to implement that in different ways. You might use SQLite or Core Data or something, or you might just want them to be ephemeral. So that would depend on your app idea. And similarly for keys, you might just have a simple sign-in flow like many apps have, and then store it in the keychain. All of the APIs take the key pair as an input. So whenever you're creating a node or signing a node, you're just using that. So hopefully you'd have one place where you stored the user's private key so that you could sign anything that way. Anything else?
Any aspects?
Well, the SDK is compatible with all Apple platforms. So that's iOS, watchOS, macOS, visionOS. So you can make a watch app using this. Sure, I would say so. I mean, Apple is a very powerful company, and they own the platforms that we're talking about. So yeah, I mean, they are definitely a censorship risk.
Yeah, and like the Apple platform, the App Store is a centralized point of failure, right? And we saw with, for example, Damus and other Nostr clients on the Apple platform, they got censored, so to speak, because they introduced zapping notes, right? And so there's always a risk, like Bryan said, but that doesn't mean that we should just stop building on the Apple platform, because there's billions of devices that use Apple platforms. And so for the folks who aren't aware of the censorship risks until it actually happens to them, we feel that it's super important to be able to build these tools and empower Apple developers to be able to build on the platform so that we can spread freedom of expression as widely as possible.
That's not heavily considered. We use Combine, so Apple's framework for reactive programming. So it's built to be integrated with Swift UI. But yeah, we didn't. I guess maybe because we're not doing heavy processing and we're not doing disk storage really, we hadn't considered that yet.
Yeah, I think we're trying to be as flexible to the developer as possible. Like, we give you the fundamental building blocks, and you as the app developer decide what is the best way to structure your app that makes sense for you. Not yet. I think the only reach out we got was, I think it was some university student in Europe, and messaged us at the time when our SDK was not ready to be used really, and I kind of gave him that warning, and he said they would explore it, but not really. But I think ultimately, back a few slides in the past, where I mentioned the different kinds of Apple Nostr clients, and they all do things differently. We want ultimately for people to adopt it. We want people to use some shared layer where everyone benefits for free, because we've already done the implementation of Nostr for them. So I think one of the goals that we mentioned was that we want to increase adoption. I secretly am thinking about reaching out to existing Nostr client developers who are on the platform to see if they'd be amenable to using it, or even if there's going to be new developers on the platform, seeing if they might want to use it. So,
and we also only just put out the first GitHub release for it, and we haven't communicated too much about it, but we hope after today that we'll be able to do that more.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Grandpa, why do you have so much Bitcoin?
Well, it all started in the year 2023 when I attended a conference called Bitblockboom.
What's Bitblockboom, Grandpa?
It was a conference where people talked about Bitcoin. This was way back when we used something called the US dollar for money.
What? Bitcoin wasn't always the world's money?
If it weren't for great speakers at Bitblockboom like Jimmy Song, Adam Curry, and Preston Pish, we'd all be living in pods and eating bugs. Instead, I was able to avoid fiat enslavement and secure generational wealth.
F***ing legend.
Be the legend your grandchildren deserve. Experience the best Bitcoin conference out there and join the Bitcoin revolution. Bitblockboom, the only conference for true Bitcoin maximalists. Book your tickets today at bitblockboom.com and use the code BBB1 for a special discount.